Hey, Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Now, I don't know if you've heard, but Mint's premium wireless is $15 a month. But I'd like to offer one other perk. We have no stores. That means no small talk. Crazy weather we're having. No, it's not. It's just weather. It is an introvert's dream. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, $15 per month equivalent required. New customer offer first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today by Sean Scullion, author of an extraordinary book on the volunteers to the British Army during the Second World War, who had survived the Spanish Civil War, who had escaped the fall of the Republic and had continued to fight against fascism all the way through until 1945. So firstly, welcome, Sean. It's a pleasure to have you today.
Good evening. I hope everybody's well, and thanks for inviting me on the podcast. Very kind of you.
Cool. So just before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about the fact that there are from time to time stories about things like the Second World War that really are hugely unknown. Combatants that you don't expect to see in places you don't expect to see them or hear about them. And this is what drew me to the book Churchill's Spaniards, which is, again, this is perhaps the first time this story has been told in a kind of published in this way. And firstly, I'd just like to talk a bit about the writing of the book and the research. Where did you first hear about these volunteers?
Well, I mean, I was brought up in Spain as a kid until the first few years of the transition to democracy. So I'm fully aware of Spain and its background history. So things like this have always fascinated me. I'm a bilingual Spanish-English speaker, so I can read in Spanish and I can read in English, obviously. I did a degree in Spanish as well. And the thing is, when it comes to this story, it's a kind of an incremental approach, really. I think these things kind of crept up on me a bit. I was always aware of things that Spaniards who were forced into exile, who lost the Spanish Civil War, were forced to do. It's very well documented about them going to France and quite a few Spaniards being interned in Nazi concentration camps, for example. We're talking about over 4,000 Spaniards who were killed in Mauthausen and similar concentration camps. But the fighting element of it, and the fact that you have men, and it's mostly men who are fighting against fascism in uniform, is pretty well documented about the French side, but not about any other side. And so I was aware of a few stories, but nothing much. But it was really when a very good friend of mine, my best friend from Spain, basically found a second-hand book of a Spaniard called Daniel Arasa. And I've had the pleasure of meeting Daniel. He's in his late 80s. He's been quite ill this year. And I launched the book in Spain in Spanish, got translated by Espasa Calpe earlier this year in June. So I was able to basically get out to Spain and do a bit of a tour. And I met up with Daniel, and he wrote a book in the mid to late 80s called Los Españoles de Churchill, Churchill Spaniards, which talks about the story, but there was so much missing. I really wanted to take it to the next level. He didn't have the access to the archives. He didn't speak to the families. He did interview some of the men whilst they were still alive, because obviously in the 80s, a lot of these men were still alive, quite a few of them in Britain. So he was able to get kind of their testimonies written down. Sadly, he told me that he destroyed his archive. So I was a bit gutted by that. So I knew I had to start from scratch.
Yeah.
His sources in his book were minimal.
Right.
So I really did have to get to grips with everything. So I set out really at the beginning of the story, trying to find out what happened at the end of the Spanish Civil War a bit more, trying to figure out what happened in those first few months after the Spanish Civil War ended, and then following the story from there through loads and loads of lines of research. Really, I have probably in the region of 150, 200 books that I've read in order to carry out research. And I've done a great, and that's in Spanish, English and French, because I'm also a fluent French speaker as well, luckily. So I've been able to get a lot of French documentation together. And then really, it was a question of getting stuck into the research, but at the same time, trying to find out if any of these families were able to tell me more. And the whole thing really led to a bit of in some ways, a catastrophic success in this regard, because since starting the research on the book 9 years ago, I've interviewed over 110 families now. It's up every month. I have 2 or 3 families getting in touch. It's incredible. Wow. And most of it's due to the fact the book's being published and they're finding out stuff they didn't know anything about, or that they realize that the book's being published and they want to tell me more about their grandfather, father, uncle.
There's a sequel. There's a sequel material there, is there?
There's a lot there. I mean, what I've been able to do is piece together different things. So archival information from British National Archives, Spanish Archives, French Archives, whether it be eyewitness accounts of what was going on at the time, or war diaries, or unit diaries, or operational orders with the names of these Spaniards on. Archives, Pioneer Corps archive has been massive. All of these Spaniards were signed onto the books of the Pioneer Corps.
Right.
Many of them didn't serve in the Pioneer Corps, but a lot of them were on the books of the Pioneer Corps. So the Pioneer Corps archives have been great because it's given me regimental numbers to work off, and I can then find out more from other archives. So what I've tried to do, and I haven't really explained this that much to many people, but what I've tried to do with most of the book is try and find 3 sources that try and back up everything I've been doing, whether it be personal accounts, something from another book, or a family story, or even from an archive that's a war diary or something like that. So three kind of sources to try and back up everything I've been doing. Some of them I've only found 1 or 2, but I've tried really hard to kind of be true to keeping that story as truthful as I can. I mean, there's a few bits in the book where I haven't been able to fully back things up, but on the whole, and I've caveated those things, but on the whole, I've tried. What I've said in the book is pretty much as close as it was, given the archives and given the evidence I've been given. I can only base it on that. I can't base it on anything else. So a long a long process.
Yeah. And it sounds like that really first-rate history work. It's a daunting project, particularly when you're starting from somewhere which, at least in the English language, hasn't really been looked at before.
Totally, yeah. I mean, the Spanish book by Daniel Rasa helped a lot, mostly with the names and some of the locations.
Hmm.
But he didn't go into great detail about a lot of things, and there were lots of gaps in his storyline. But in his book, he also covered not army. I decided only to concentrate in the army because I'm a serving officer in the army, and that kind of gives me a bit of a shoe in on
Right.
in certain archives and things like that. But also because I didn't want to try and dilute the story too much. Having said that, though, there is so much evidence I've got now. There's so much archival material I've got. I could write another 4 or 5 books. Some of the families have given me their whole archive. They've said, it's better in your hands than in ours, and I've been donated lots of material in order to kind of do some more research on. So
Yeah.
the book only really touches the tops of the waves of the story, but at the same time I wanted to be as true as possible to telling this story,
Hmm.
and tell the story from a kind of a fairly indirect approach, in as far as I wanted to make sure that the story was told in a fairly matter-of-fact way, nothing too emotional, but at
Yeah.
the same time provide some personal side to that from the material that the dozens and dozens of families have provided me with. Because we're talking probably, by the time I published the book in Britain in September 2024, so just over a year ago, the book probably contained around 50 families worth of information. And I was trying
Sure.
to give individual stories, but merging those stories with the overall story of a certain group or a certain
Hmm.
unit or wherever it might be. And the Spaniards served across the whole sphere of the British Army, so I was trying really hard, and in so many different locations. We're
Right.
talking Norway all the way down to North Africa, all the way across Western Europe. We're talking all of the Mediterranean, we're talking the Middle East, we're talking North Africa or further over towards Egypt. We're talking places like Crete and Greece. We're even talking Somalia, Eritrea, places like that, against the Italians. We're even talking about some of them even most probably in Burma. I've still got some work to do in Burma on
Right.
that. I've got evidence of 2 so far, but that wasn't enough really to put in the book. So I've concentrated mostly on
Hmm.
the Western kind of sphere
Yeah.
in this story, because that's where the majority of them were fighting.
What was the route? I mean, how do they find themselves in the British Army? Were there popular kind, I say popular, but well-trodden routes and pathways out of Spain to Britain?
Not directly. Most of the guys who served in the British Army actually did it mostly after having served with the French,
Right.
or having been interned by Vichy France. So we're talking about 2 waves, really. We're talking a 1940 wave where we've got Spaniards arriving in Britain, having served in the French Foreign Legion and in Norway and France, and joining the British Army in 1940, as well as some Spaniards joining the British Army in Egypt, having served in the French Foreign Legion and foreign marching regiments in Syria and Lebanon. And then basically the second wave is from 1940 in 1940, end of 42 into 1944 in North Africa. That's the biggest group. The 1942 to 44 group in North Africa are mostly people who've been interned by Vichy France on the behest of either Franco or Vichy France or even Germany, and put into, in some cases, concentration camps in places in like Algeria, or labor colonies, or forced labor centers in Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, places like that. We're talking about probably 800 or so of the Spaniards, of the 1,200 Spaniards that I have found so far. And I've documented every single one in the back of the book. You've got all the regimental numbers and all the lists in the back of the book. Around 800 enlisted in North Africa alone.
Hmm.
So that's a big, so they're the 2 waves. And then a lot of them, once they'd joined and enlisted as volunteers, like you said earlier, they then basically become members of the Pioneer Corps in many cases, but
Yeah.
many of them also then transfer to other things, or they've even started off in another part of the army and end up in the Pioneer Corps by the end of the war. So, and we've got people in the SAS, we've got people in the Commandos, we've got people in infantry units,
Hmm.
we've got people serving across all the different kind of battlefields. Italy, North Africa, Crete, North Africa in the desert, as well as North Africa in places like Tunisia and places like that. And then obviously Western Europe, D-Day landings, Arnhem, Germany, the Netherlands, and obviously a lot of them are in Britain as well. So it's a real mixed bag, and they are really, spread across very many elements, and that a lot of them wanted to join the army because they wanted to carry on fighting against fascism, and some of them, quite a few probably felt that they naively felt that Britain would be the Allies would then get rid of Franco at the end of the war, which sadly didn't happen. But on the whole, they were quite ideologically kind of motivated. A lot of them put their politics to one side to fight in a British Army uniform. Many of them were anarchists, for example. We would never have allowed those kind of people to join the British Army. But ultimately, a lot of them had a lot of experience. You look at some of the people who were serving in the SAS and the Commandos, and they had a great deal of experience, and they were actually an asset. So it's a real mixed bag.
There were, of course, there were a number of international brigaders who come back in 1939 and sign up and bring valuable experience of fighting in the kind of war that's coming. And so I can see how, were almost all of the people that you've looked at people that had been seen active combat during the Civil War, or were there some people
pretty much? I would say that a good 1,000 of the 1,200 pretty much did active combat. And the rest, I would say, were people who were on the peripheries of that and were mostly maybe political types. You've got people who were in some of the youth wings, because a lot of these men were very young. They were in their late teens, early 20s. Even when they joined the British Army, some of them who joined in 1940 were 20, 21. Some of them lied about their age and they were 18. But had been fighting in the Spanish Civil War since the age of 16, some people were fighting from 1936 to 1945, it's 9 years solid combat with a pause in the middle when they were incarcerated, when they crossed over to France or were sent to North Africa. But on the whole, you've got people who are very, very, very experienced, and many of them, there is lots of accounts of many of them carrying war wounds and having still shrapnel and other things, and many of them being injured during combat in British Army uniform and not really worrying about it because they've been injured several times before. So for them, and many of them, it was just a simple case of kind of carrying on as they had been before, but in British Army uniform, fighting actually in an army that a lot of them were very proud of doing, to be honest, as well.
What did the British make of them? There must have been kind of quite a curiosity.
There was. You had, for example, many of the Spaniards who served in the French Foreign Legion and the foreign marching troops who joined in 1940. They were seen as pretty battle hardened, and therefore the British did not have any issues with them. Actually, the ones who joined the Middle East Commandos, the first recruits into number 50 Middle East Commando, the first Middle East Commando unit in the summer of 1940, were over 60 Spaniards who'd managed to escape from Libya and Lebanon. From Syria and Lebanon, and they basically they got through the training very easily because they were used to the conditions, and they were actually seen as really good at fighting at night and living off the land. So they set a very good example. They weren't great shots as such, but overall their experience was seen as an asset. A little bit more cautious maybe with some of those who were in North Africa, most of whom joined the Pioneer Corps. But even then, they were seen as people who did have that battle experience. There's quite a lot of examples of Spaniards who ended up serving in the SOE, Special Operations Executive, for example. We're talking about over 100 Spaniards in Britain who were trained by the SOE, and several dozen who were trained by the SOE in North Africa as well. So they were seen as people who had a lot of experience. I think the biggest issue was probably the language barrier. I've given loads of examples of that in the book, where Spaniards couldn't speak English, and most people actually could speak a bit of French, so that was the language that they used. A lot of the senior NCOs, the sergeants and other people like that who were Spanish were able to kind of be the interlocutors because they were mostly able to speak better English than the soldiers. But yeah, I mean, most of them, their language was a bit of an issue. I mean, there's an example I quote at the beginning where one of the Spaniards who joins from the French Foreign Legion and joins the #1 Spanish company in Britain in the summer of 1940, comes to attention and says bonjour as he's signing on the dotted line, and he's down as private bonjour on the nominal roll. So there you go. But yeah, so there's several cases like that of the language barrier being an issue. Of course, yes, many of them were classed as Reds, but you could say quite easily that due to their combat experience, they were taken on board, and there was some caution towards the beginning of the war, but by 1942, 1943, it was very much a needs must scenario for many people. So
yeah. I mean, there are there are numerous kind of examples of social sort of British socialists and communists in the British Army throughout the Second World War, who again they set aside their kind of objections to capitalism and imperialism and think, well, this is the great anti-fascist struggle, and probably the officer class are they kind of reciprocate in a sort of way and think, we need the men we've got, and let's just hope that they sort of behave themselves. And
Mint is still $15 a month for premium wireless. And if you haven't made the switch yet, here are 15 reasons why you should. 1, it's $15 a month. 2, seriously, it's $15 a month. 3, no big contracts. 4, I use it. 5, my mom uses it. Are you playing me off? That's what's happening, right? Okay, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, $15 per month equivalent required. New customer offer first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
That kind of understanding.
Very much so. I mean, obviously, for a lot of these Spaniards, they were a lot more extremely politically, ideologically motivated, and many of those men returned to that after the war in Britain. They set up a Spanish Ex-Servicemen Association at the end of the war, which was quite politically motivated, very linked to the trade unions, very linked to the Labour Party in the 1950s and early 60s. A lot of members of the Labour Party supported the Spanish Ex-Servicemen Association. The majority of the members of the Spanish Ex-Servicemen Association, specifically the committee, were anarchists, and they kind of probably, I would say, they watered down slightly their politics to fit in with a British model, but they were re-energized when it came to talking about Franco's dictatorship in exile. So they were more motivated about trying to get that story out rather than being too heavily involved in British politics. A lot of them were very heavily unionized and did join unions in Britain.
Did the veterans, because there is a long-standing international brigaders veterans association, I wonder, did they have much to do with one another in the post-war years?
Very little. I mean, there were some elements that did kind of speak to each other. The majority of the Spaniards who made up the Spanish Ex-Servicemen Association, we're talking about 400 or so members out of the 800 or so that settled in Britain. Most of the members were based in London, and they were linked very much to the trade unions in London. People working in the hotel, restaurant kind of industries. Quite a few working in kind of smaller businesses. Some people were working in the print press and things like that. So they did get heavily involved with the politics in London. But when it came to groups like the Spanish brigaders, the British brigaders that fought in the Spanish Civil War, they did know each other, but they weren't necessarily actively involved. I mean, people like Clement Attlee and people like that were known. I mean, in fact, some of the Spaniards even met George Orwell before he died. So they did have these links. Agustin Raventura, who was one of the original founding members of the Spanish Ex-Servicemen Association, he did get very heavily involved with individuals like George Orwell. Daniel Day-Lewis's father was very politically motivated as well. Yeah, and and then you have Helen Bonham Carter's grandmother as well, who's very heavily involved in supporting the Spanish Ex-Servicemen Association. So a lot of these people were already heavily involved with Spanish Republican movements in exile and also supporting the Spanish Republic during the Spanish Civil War. So ultimately, they were all very much talking to each other, whether or not they were actively doing things together all the time. I haven't been able to find out many examples of it, but the Spanish Ex-Servicemen Association certainly tried to do a lot of protests. One of the biggest protests they did was in 1960 against the Spanish Franco's dictatorship, the Franco regime.
Yeah.
And that was mostly initiated by the fact that the Spanish foreign minister was visiting Britain, and he had actually fought on the Eastern Front as a member of the Blue Division, and he was a signed-up member of the Spanish Fascist Party and the French and the German Fascist Party as well. So yeah, I mean, there were lots of examples like that.
And obviously, the book's title, Churchill's Spaniards. Did Churchill have any dealings with the Spaniards at all, or was he aware of them?
Well, first of all, with a title like that, I can't win anyway, because obviously, if you're politically motivated to the left, you're not going to like the fact that Churchill was involved in anything to do with Spanish Republicans. And some Spanish Republicans will also say that as well. And if you're quite right-wing minded and you're a bit of a fan of Churchill, who was obviously an ardent monarchist, then you're not going to be too happy with having, a Republican flag draped over the figure of Churchill, which is what you see on the front cover of the British edition. That was watered down in Spain on the Spanish edition. The Spanish title wouldn't be Los Españoles de Churchill. It was actually called Españoles contra el Nazismo, so Spaniards against Nazism. And I still managed to get a little bit of a Republican flag on the front cover.
Yeah.
Did Churchill actually know that these Spaniards were serving the British Army? Most certainly he did. And the reason why was because there were several Spaniards who were involved in the Special Operations Executive, and Churchill was actually heavily involved in giving direction and guidance on the establishment of the Special Operations Executive, but also he was heavily involved in trying to keep Spain out of the war, trying to keep Spain neutral. Spain went from neutrality to non-belligerent status in 1914, stayed like that basically until 1942. And during that period, people like Churchill were heavily involved in ensuring that Spain remained as neutral as possible, or out of the war at least. And one of the best examples of that is by paying off Franco's generals. Churchill signed off a series of documents that allowed a Spanish billionaire who was commonly known as the Pirate of the Mediterranean, Juan March Ordinas, who actually had been on the books of the British intelligence services during World War I, but actually was one of the most richest men in Spain, and had made most of his money from racketeering and from arms importing and exporting during World War I. And also during the 1920s, during the RIF wars in North Africa, where Spain and France were involved. Through him, he was able to pay off and use up to $150 million in today's money to pay off Franco's entourage. Juan March Ordinas was also put onto the books of the British intelligence services during World War II, and he was actually the person that sponsored Franco's entry into the Spanish Civil War in 1936 by paying for the plane that got Franco from the Canaries to North Africa. So there is an indirect link between Churchill and Franco in that way. And of course, Churchill would have known about these Spaniards in the British Army, because the Spaniards specifically the Spaniards who were going to be used potentially behind enemy lines in the Iberian Peninsula should the Germans actually invade the Iberian Peninsula and try and capture Gibraltar. So yeah, so he did know about them. Did he know about all of them? I doubt it, but he certainly would have done known about the SOE. He may have even known about some of the ones who were in the SAS. There were 15 Spaniards in the SAS. Up to probably 9 of them were in the second SAS, which was predominantly a British SAS, but it did have a group of funnies, as they were called. And there were Spaniards in the second SAS who served in France, no, in North Africa, France, and in Italy in the latter end of the war. So yeah, he would have known.
Hey, Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Now, I don't know if you've heard, but Mint's premium wireless is $15 a month. But I'd like to offer one other perk. We have no stores. That means no small talk. Crazy weather we're having. No, it's not. It's just weather. It is an introvert's dream. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, $15 per month equivalent required. New customer offer first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
So before we finish up, let's talk a bit about the book now available in all good bookshops.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, the paper book's out now. It came out. Sadly, the hardback was out of print earlier on this year, and the paperback came out this summer and is available, as you say. And you can probably also buy it on the Helion bookshop, Helion bookshop website as well.
And so, as we always say, if you can, please buy the book from an independent book retailer.
So
they will be gone unless we support them. If you can't get it from your local bookshop, I'll put a link to Helion and buy it directly from the publisher, because they need your support as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a couple of events coming up to help with the launch of the paperback. So I'm going to be touring the north. I've got a couple of events in the north coming up in a couple of weeks' time. Well, in a few days' time. 22nd of November at 2 p.m. I'm in Manchester at the Manchester Central Hall on Oldham Street. And that's in conjunction with the International Brigade Memorial Trust Northwest Division, and also the Instituto Cervantes. They've kindly sponsored it. So I'll be giving a talk there and signing books as well. 22nd of November, 2 p.m. And then the following weekend, I'm going to be in the Northeast with the Northeast Volunteers for Liberty, which is the group that also is the International Brigades Memorial Trust group for the Northeast. And that's going to be in Billingham on Friday, the 28th of November at St. Cuthbert's Church at 7 p.m. that evening. So I'll be giving talks, signing books as well on both of those. And of course, there'll be a few other events in the future. But yeah, those are the key events coming up with the paperback launch.
Fantastic. And so if you're in the area, do go along. And I think it will be an amazing evening. Sean, it was a real pleasure. And if there's more to this story, please let me know. It'd be great to talk again. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface. Yeah,
I mean, I think there's a lot more to talk about. I'm going to be doing some more research on some of the individual stories. I've got some of the archives that I'm going to use to build some more stories. I'm also looking at probably my next book project. There's 2 more book projects I'm looking at. One is going to be on the Middle East Commandos, which is an interesting topic. Nobody's really written about the Middle East Commandos. And also I'm looking at a project on Juan March Ordinas, who I mentioned earlier, the pirate of the Mediterranean. So there's plenty more afoot. Watch this space, as they say.
Fantastic. Well, when there's something to bring, do come back, and it'll be great to talk about it again.
Yeah, very much so.
Thanks very much, Sean.
GEHA was started by postal employees in 1937. Today, we offer exclusive health plans for all federal employees and retirees. GEHA. Find your federal health plan at GEHA.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.